heading skywards, as I would expect. Welcome, everybody. Hi. Hello, Kiran. Welcome to...
Hello, Alastair.
Thanks. Good afternoon and welcome to the Sales Scoop, a weekly show for startups who want to improve how they sell. We tackle the hottest topics in sales and bring you the shiniest pearls of wisdom from the most experienced sellers. I'm Alastair Cole, your host for today and co-founder of the Uplift Partnership.
And my name's Kiran Gill, and also a co-founder of the Uplift Partnership.
Our mission is to simplify sales for startups. It's that simple. Today's hot topic is setting sales goals for startups. Really important, and we'll get into why in a little bit. It actually sits as the very first task, the very first output that we would expect to see from a sales function in a startup. Actually, our 7 steps to sales success for startups. Sales strategy is the first section, and setting overall goals and targets is number 1 in that first section. So pretty important. And, you know, goals are numbers, right? It's fairly numeric. So it surely is just about the pure numbers, right, Kiran, setting a sales goal?
Yeah, there's no emotion, absolutely none involved. Yeah, you should just be robotic when it comes to doing goals. It's all about the numbers, Alastair, because there's no human feelings at all.
That's good. My scientific bent is focused on that. We'll get into the numbers, but I appreciate that your motivation and taking down goals is highly emotive as human beings that we are, and I get that. On the science side, what we're seeing is reasonable scores across our 360s from clients we're working with. The average score actually for out of 5 is a 3, so 60% progress we're seeing on average across health tech, ed tech, pure tech startups that we're working with. Most of them seem to have their headline metrics sorted, they're in place, and they're broadly aligned to the direction, the strategy of the overall sales team. So they're doing okay, and you'd expect that because it's such an important thing. And now is a real focus for us to get into those sales goals. So let's start with, you know, your thoughts, my friend, on when we talk about setting overall sales goals and setting ourselves up for success. What do we mean by sales goals?
Well, what comes to mind for me, and I think most people know this kind of saying or phrase from Abraham Lincoln, where, you know, somebody asked him, how would you cut down a tree? And he said, oh, if it took me 8 hours to cut down a tree, 6 hours sharpening the axe. And now a lot of people might say that quote's to do with preparation. Personally, I see that more to do with goal setting. He's got a goal of cutting down a tree. However, if you're not prepared to do it, and if you've got not everything in place, and you're going to fail. So no matter how big your goal, and that comes straight back down to sales goals, you know, and I've worked with, and we've worked with so many companies that are successful and so many companies that aren't successful because fundamentally the goals are just in the wrong place, not put together properly. And, you know, like you said, some of that's down to the science and some of it's down to the human part underneath it.
Yeah, you can get really complex as well and break down those goals numerically, but ultimately it's about the direction in which you're heading. And, you know, some of those businesses we've worked with that have got those headline metrics in place, you know, what would be, if somebody was not at that level and they were starting out, you know, what would be a kind of first couple of example metrics you'd recommend they put down, Kiran?
Well, obviously the top one, your top metric is always going to be obviously your sales target, you know, the target that you're chasing for the year or the year ahead. And then realistically, it's the ones that back up. So, you know, when it comes down to this, there's multiple goals you could have from a startup point of view. Your turnover, your revenue goal is probably going to be the one that's going to be driving the company. However, you'll have sub goals underneath that, like how many customers you have to get on board, how many customers you have to retain, how long it will take you in your sales cycle to see how quickly you can get that money in. You could also have how many how many clients you've got in your pipeline you can have in place, but underlying they're all flowing into your revenue, and that's pretty much the big goal that we always look at when we start working with clients. We want to see the mechanics behind how they got to that figure.
Yeah, and you can break it right down, can't you, with the leads coming in, with deal closing, customer success, but trying to keep it simple to start with is great. We work with a lot of clients and they have a number, it's like, this many sales or this much income. And let's talk a little bit about like why it's important. A lot goes on in our minds and our brains when we kind of thinking about setting those goals. And is it lofty enough? Is it ambitious enough? Is it too conservative? The number of goals I should be setting for my sales function, do I share them? There's a lot of kind of stuff going on. Like what can you talk a little bit about why it's so important from a sales culture point of view to have the right sales targets in place?
Experienced salesperson as I am, as you know, I'm in companies where the goals have been, there's a lot of work that goes into, setting sales targets, especially at, I've worked at enterprise and level, and, they're not written on the back of a piece of paper that somebody just plucks a number out of the ether and goes that to bits and say, oh, don't, and says, oh, just chase that. Well, it shouldn't be. So I know for a fact that when I was working in finance, that our goals sometimes, depending on what the goals were for business. So you can get to that level, can't you? You can influence how your team do certain things, just like in sports. That's what you can do with a goal. If you tell that they're expected to sell one particular product more than another, you can change the goals around to influence them on their budgets or their bonuses and commission payouts. So goals are really, really important. You really need to think, especially from a sales point of view, have you really sort of given your team or yourself, and where come from? Now, has that been, have you actually sat down and thought about that number? Is that what you really need to turn over to hit your company target this year? Or have you just plucked a number out of the sky and just said, hey, we just need 100 users, it doesn't really matter? And yeah, that's where it comes down to, in my thoughts. Alastair, what's your thought?
Yeah. Well, in terms of setting yourself up for success, and that's what the aim of this episode is to cover. It's not just about a number on a page. Actually, the process, when we do it for ourselves and when we do it for startups we work with, it's about a process. And I love sitting down, the pair of us, in front of a spreadsheet and looking at some of the metrics, some of the drivers, and chatting about it and going through that process and thinking about the influences, because at the end of the day, it's actually in the doing together that the kind of juice comes out and you get to a decent answer. And because I know there are examples of people who've set the right kind of sales goals, but the product wasn't right, or being sold in the right way or at the right level, and so the business didn't succeed. So they're kind of intricately tied. So I like that sitting down process, the factors that are going in, the numbers that are coming out. I think that's really important. And unsurprisingly, we're seeing startups who've got a good number in place, they've got those headline metrics and they're looking to kick on to the next level. And so, it's easy for them to benchmark. It's easy for other startups to benchmark themselves against what we've seen in various different sectors. And that helps getting a barometer of where you are. But I guess another critically important thing about setting yourself up for success is that it becomes a North Star of where people in the business are going to and what everybody's getting on board. That is an emotional thing, right? It's a psychological thing. What are any that's a big area that you're interested in. What have you got anything to share in that area, the kind of human aspect of goal setting?
Yeah, well, as humans, we do this. Lots of us do it at the start of the year. We set goals, company goals, sales, whatever it is. We write them down. It's really amazing. So, you know, if you want to set a goal, the science behind it says that you should write it down, actually physically with a pen and paper, and not or use your thumbs on your mobile device. There's something about the science of you putting it down to it that makes it more realistic. And then also you're working out beneath it. So, you know, that's one thing I would say straight away. That's one of the kind of like on finding your goals, that kind of side. The other thing, you might know people, be your person yourself. I know that I've done this. It's quite easy to share your goal around to people, and you go around telling everybody that you're going to do something, even from a sales point of view. And the other soft factor, just by telling people that you're going to try to achieve, you get an actual dopamine. So for those of you who listen to podcasts out there and know about how dopamine and motivation work together, somebody a goal. So me just saying to Alastair, we're going to hit £100,000 next month. It's very easy for Alastair just to say, oh, well done, mate. Oh, that's great. And I get a good feeling. It doesn't really matter if I achieve that goal. I've already got the dopamine hit. So what I do, I just make up targets left, right, and center. So from an emotional point of view, you don't want to be sharing your targets out there too often. You want to write it down, and you want to have some of the science behind it, like Alastair says, to back that up. And then what you want to do is realistically have a plan on how you're going to get there. You need to sharpen that axe to make sure that and you're going to get there. You can't just say £100,000 next month and have no idea how you're going to get there.
Yeah, so let's dig a little bit deeper into how to do it properly, and it's a topic we've covered before, and there's kind of three, you know, quite clear areas that we can help to sharpen that axe. One of them is setting the right targets. Okay, we talked a little bit about that in terms of having headline numbers, some of the other supporting numbers in lead gen, deal closing, customer success, and NPS, and many others. But how challenging should they be for a startup, Kiran? In your experience working with startup, how challenging should their sales goals be?
Well, they need to be challenging. You know, you need to make something challenging, but you can't make it so hard that it's unattainable. Lose motivation. So first of all, your mathematics count. Your mathematics, find out exactly what you need to do as a business to break even. What do you need to do to keep your investors on board? What do you need to do to keep the lights on? You know, from a startup point of view, that's the first thing you should be looking at doing. It's not about making profit. It's about keeping the lights on and making sure there's food on the table, and making sure your investors aren't going to run away because nothing's happening. That's where the maths comes from. So that is where it should be setting. That's your North Star. And then anything above that, I always think to myself for a startup. So do your running costs. Find out what it costs to pay yourself and all the people involved. You need to feed yourself as well. And then work it backwards and think to yourself, right, how many of those products? And don't forget what to deliver that product as well, or solution. Because if you've got to sell 100,000 widgets, it's also going to cost you 100,000 widgets as well. So it's very easy to just throw out revenue, understand what the kind of what labor costs are going to be. So just to understand, well, am I going to have to employ more people? Is that going to cost me more money? It gets complex. So that's one goal. It's very easy to just go out there and use a very round number, but you know that's my take on it. And when we ask people about their sales, we go into that detail. We want to understand how they got there. Was that a number just plucked out of the air, or was it really thought about?
Yeah, and I find that over time, as the more time is investment and the better you get at it, the narrower it gets, you get closer to what will actually be a successful goal. Things tend to narrow. You don't end up jumping around all over the place as different factors come in. It tends to narrow like a funnel down to something that everybody's agreed on and is happy with. And, you know, making them challenges is important. Studies show that actually more demanding goals lead to higher performance about 90% of the time. But yeah, you can't go too far. And so getting them right is obviously critical. What are your views on having more versus having fewer? Because we've seen there could be a whole raft. You could have a very complicated spreadsheet. What are your view on few versus many?
Fewer the better. Basically, you want to prioritize as much as you can. So, and if you want to give if you've got a team and you've got an SDR, a sales development rep, you want to give them a chasing that's going to help the overall target. If that's customer, or it could be, the amount of emails they're sending per day, or whatever it is. You want to give them a target or a goal that is going to drive into it, but you don't want to give them so many metrics because as a human, we need to prioritize, don't we? We need to have a priority, not prioritize, not have lots, because then how is it a priority any longer? You need to narrow it down. So my personal thing would be 12-week cycle. 3 months is a nice way of looking at things. The human brain likes this kind of quarter-on-quarter thing, and you want to have one goal for that quarter that you really fixate on. And I know we're going to get onto habits, but you want to make that into a habit, no longer something that you need to think about, and then you can start another goal on the back of that, and after another 12 weeks.
Well, that's perfect. Let's roll straight into point 2, right? After number 1, set the right goals. 2 is about creating those habits, right? And dividing them down into smaller chunks. And what we do this a lot. We get into the spreadsheet, we get the big numbers, and then we start to break it down. What have you observed in the startups you've been working with about best practice for them in terms of how granular they get, how many different chunks, and how can they turn those into habits?
When it comes to where we normally get involved is that you're looking at customer acquisition, aren't you? So you're looking at new customers coming in. That's where your revenue normally tends to come from, especially for us. So then it's about how many people are you talking to? So how many emails or how many phone calls or how many direct messages do you need to send to get one meeting? These are all aspects to build up a goal. So think about the detail needs to be there. You can't just say that we need 6 new clients and we have a bit of a plan. You've got to sharpen the axe there. Now, some of those things can be habits. You can say, you are going to send 10 emails a day or 20. Once you start getting the mathematics in, or once you start getting the numbers in, you'll suddenly realize whether that function is bringing out the number that you want. So maybe actually my email click rate isn't high enough, and you're more of a science geek than I am to those things, numbers. But you need to start looking at those and think to yourself, well, how many emails do we need to send out before we get some kind of response? And is it worth it? Or how many customers, and you've got to think about that. That's how you're going to drive your kind of habits. And once you've got those, it's quite easy to start swapping things around and say, well, actually, if we hire one more person, does that mean we're going to get double the output? Or, and all those kind of things.
Yeah, and in our business, I've taken a lead from you and linked daily habits or daily rituals that I already have with checking in on goals. So, that once a week on a Friday morning when we produce our analytics report, that's the time where we then check in on how we're doing versus the goals and analytics for the week. But what is the bigger picture? So that's a nice build. I think it's easy for startup founders who got 50 fires lit and that they're managing at the same time to skip past the habit, and before you know it, you're 90 days into the plan and you're nowhere near your 12-month target. So yeah, connecting it to habits, I think, is something you mentioned in the past that I rate really highly. And I've noticed that that becomes like habitual. It becomes automatic, us checking in on those big goals. and you just end up, advancing towards it. You talked about, checking in early on. How, in your mind, how important is it to review in the early stage of a plan to get a goal, whether it is the right goal, and how to deal with any things that come up? Tell me about your views on startups, like reviewing or changing things kind of in flight.
It happens, doesn't it? Just because we've come up with a number, we might realize that we're not going to go there. The thing is, I was part of a company that used to set its kind of sales goals. They were just made up. There was no realization on how they were going to be done, no planning behind it, and things were just thrown out there. Now that's demotivating. So if you are going to aim and you do change in flight the target, think about what that's do for motivation in the team. It comes. Now you might be easier or harder because something's changed within your market. So the big thing to do on it, realistically, is a startup, you're working with very little at the start. So kind of you're kind of making it up. But that's why talking to somebody who's done it before gives you a good idea of realistically really get on this month if we really try that hard. What will a certain campaign do? So think to yourself, if you're going to change your target, why? Do you really need to do it? And have you got the information to back you up that if you change it, that you're not going to have to change it again the week after by got it wrong again? Because that is really not the right thing to do, is it?
Yeah, and that, you make a great point, and actually it's one of the reasons that I like those shorter term goals. So like you talked about that 12, and for us, like 13s are like us, but like a number of us in the company. So we set that 13-week target and then just go for it, right? And if you miss it, then you miss it, but you haven't got long to wait before you get to assess how well you did and restart another one, rather than that 12-month, and you feel like you're committed. So actually keeping it shorter, keeping it simpler is a great way. And actually, if you don't get there, then you can review again quite quickly. And that leads us quite nicely into talking to others, and something that we've chatted about ahead of the show about sharing accountability. It was a big deal, 18 months ago about, oh yeah, share your goals, put them out there, hold yourself accountable. Surely that's still the case, right, Kiran? It's a good idea to be sharing with the world and putting yourself out there.
Well, yeah, I kind of touched on this before. The most is that you get that hit on social media, and people liking that you'll chase a particular goal or whatever. And we're talking more about personal goals. If you make it you just get that motivate. People, you're never going to tell somebody that that's a bad goal to chase. When you tell somebody something positive, they get that dopamine hit. That means they get rewarded. So don't share it, but share it to people. I love sharing my goals with Alastair. I share my goals with Alastair because he's going to keep me accountable to them. How are you doing with that? How's that going? Have we really hit those numbers? Are you going to? The thing is, it means a lot more to me to have pushing me than somebody who's going to get me for just setting a goal. So think about who you're going to be sharing it with, and think towards, if you're going to share that goal out, be prepared. Be prepared to be held accountable. Don't make it too broad. Don't throw it out there on social media and tell the world that you're going to hit 1 million, because loads of people will tell you you're doing great. Hey, well done, and you know what? You probably don't care then after that.
Yeah. And I think there's something powerful about, you have to tell others, otherwise it's just in your head. Although I love that insight from you about writing it down physically, and I want to get into doing that, even if we're on a video call. But yeah, you've got to share it with some people, but it's the people who are on the bus with you, right? The people in the core team, the people who are, core friends and family. So the group's got to be it's small, and I think also, doing something regular, like reviewing it on a weekly basis when we do our analytics deep dive. Actually, that's good, because that keeps you on track. That keeps us accountable, because we're constantly looking at that target. So talk about, we've still got a few minutes left. I just want to pick out, are there any like big bear traps, right? Anything that you would recommend a startup crew like avoid or don't do or be concerned about when setting their startup goals, like sales goals?
Well, first, yeah, I think we've covered that already. Make sure that they're realistic, and think about the mechanics behind them. You know, the big bear trap is just throwing out like, you know, you hear them all the time, don't you? We're going to do so many things in 100 days, or we're going to do, and they just turn into sound bites. See,
Yep.
think to yourself, what are we really trying to achieve? And in your weekly sales meetings, talk about the target. Talk about where you're getting to. How are you getting? Make sure you have a sales meeting. I've worked with so many companies that don't have sales meetings. It's terrible. Have a sales meeting. First thing that you look at as it is, boom, the numbers. This is what we do. And you can look into that, the analytics, whatever you want. How many emails sent, whatever it is, where we're getting our customers from, first introductions, first meeting, new clients, blah blah blah. You can have all those. But the thing is, that gives the realization to the sales meeting and make it about the numbers. Make it about the number itself. And that, whether 15 minutes or half an hour a week, it has to be weekly. That's my big, the alarm bells for me go when I walk into a startup and there is no sales meeting, or it's a sales meeting that has got nothing to do with numbers. It's like, what's going on here? And don't do that. Get the number, even if it's the wrong number, let's get there and let's share that and make people accountable, but also let's see what's out there. And as a team, let's figure this. We're a startup. That's what we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be agile, you know, and then get to the crux of what's happening, and you can then change the levers depending on what needs.
Yeah, great advice. Do the work. Great advice. Do the work. Crunch the numbers. Keep it simple. Thanks, mate. That's great. As I said at the top of the show, this is the inside sales strategy, which we see as the most important part of a sales function. It's one of the 7 steps that underpins our 360-degree sales diagnostic tool that we've drawn some numbers from across the show from startups we've been working with. So that product has 6 other sections and 51 other areas of measurement of a sales function on top of just overall sales targets and goals. And 2 weeks from today, we will be doing a live webinar where we'll be going through pulling out a few insights from the 5 reports we've put together to date and the startups we've been working with. So tune in a couple of weeks, and we'll start to share some of those numbers and share some insights on how startups are doing with this new product of ours. Okay, I guess in summary, it's about setting the right goals, creating habits for those goals, and then sharing and being accountable to a small group. Any last comments, my friend, before we wrap it up?
No, just set those goals. Also, just get in touch with us if you want any more information about setting goals or just want to talk about it. Happy to reach out to us on LinkedIn. Probably the easiest way to get in touch with either of us. And really happy to just chat to you about what your sales goals are and what you probably need to have a look at. So take us up on that.
Yeah, I'd say have fun. I mean, if you like numbers, and I do, love being in a spreadsheet, you love the formula. It doesn't have to be that complicated, or even just on a paper and pencil. Have fun. Spend the time. Getting to the right number and get everybody on the bus. Right, great. It's been an excellent show. Thank you for your insights, my friend. I think that's it for us. We'll wrap up and say goodbye. Goodbye from me here in London.
And talk to you soon from Austria.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Bye.